Life can be boring. Whether you're a mailman, a teacher, or a healthcare CEO, you may find yourself longing for more in this life. That's why, as a huge fan of Indiana Jones, I've always been able to watch one of those movies and escape on a whimsical adventure deeply rooted in heroism, morality, and history. Whether it's the famous bridge-cutting scene from Temple of Doom, or the den of snakes in Raiders, there's always incredible moments to keep you at the edge of your seat. However, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle asks the question, do you really want to be Indy, or just watch him on screen? Nostalgia, much like any of the other treasures featured in the series, is very dangerous. Do you really want to meet your hero when that really means that you'll have to control and interact with him for many times more the hour runtime of any of the movies? It's a great question that Todd Howard set out to answer. Thankfully, there were top men working on it. Top men. And by that I mean Machine Games. The jokes already write themselves that the team behind Wolfenstein already knew how to kill Nazis. But with a match made in heaven, I gotta say, I didn't love the game at first. So as I set out with this review, I'll pose a little bit of my own question alongside it. Is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle a shiny gem in a great franchise, or should it have been left buried much like some of the later entries? Because in the beginning, I was ready to put a line through the Great Circle. A slow start and frankly clunky controls had me about to give up digging. But I stuck with it, and eventually you do strike gold. So much like our pal Indy, my patience was rewarded. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait hundreds of years to find that treasure. So what about this game and its opening did I not like? Well, first off, spoilers kinda, but I feel like it's already been kind of everywhere, and it's in the marketing of the game. The opening of the game is actually just the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark remade into a tutorial, and obviously with the in-game visuals. So not only is it slower because you have to play through it, it's not as briskly paced, it's also the only part in the entire game that begs the question, does this look like Indy? Does this look like these characters? And quite frankly, no. You're never going to look as good as a Spielberg film. You're never going to do this or that, and you can imitate very well. And as I'll go on to say, it does imitate very well, and it fits that mold. However, this is the one time that it kind of asks, can we be that? And the answer is no, but you can be like that. As I've said, I think the controls of the game are just clunky in general. This game has a bit of an identity crisis. Much like Indy with his professor/archaeologist personas clashing back and forth throughout the entire franchise and whether the next adventure should really call to him or not. This game is very similar in that sense where it has a similar struggle, but a clash rather between the first and the third person perspectives. When this game was announced, everyone assumed that it would be third person, much like the games that were actually inspired by Indiana Jones, Uncharted, and Tomb Raider. You know, if you're going to pay for the license to see Indiana Jones, you're going to want to see him as absolutely much as possible, right? Well, that is actually where a very awesome design choice came into play. Everyone knows that Machine Games did Wolfenstein, and those are first-person games, and they're very good. And to my genuine surprise, playing Indiana Jones, seeing it's a primarily first-person game, it reminded me a lot of the first time I got one of those little VR, off-brand headsets that you can put your phone in, that I got when I was like 16, 17 years old. Because goddamn, this is the absolute best first-person porn I have ever seen. Obviously, that's just a joke. That's not actually what's going on in this. But the term in and of itself is nebulous. Countless first-person animations, your hands touching anything, and it feels like you can really interact with so much of the world with different puzzles, items that you pick up, and of course the combat itself. It's all super well-realized, immersive in every sense of the term, and to that I have to give the game the absolute props. You throw in some great voice acting as Indy, and it really does start to feel like, hey, I am Indiana Jones, much like I believe Todd Howard really wanted us to feel. Now, where the wrench gets thrown into the plan is there is third-person aspects of this game. I'm not talking about the very beautiful and very well animated cutscenes of the game. Those are actually what I think is the best way to show off Indy. But more on that and the voice acting in a little bit. We'll get to that. But personally, I think the traversal third person, whether that be when you start climbing up a wall and it goes into third person, when you do your, famous whip and try to swing across a gap, that goes into third person. Not only is it super jarring, that jump from first to third person, and back as you're trying to land a jump, it's also very jarring just to kind of look at some of these animations. The climbing animation, or the rock wall, all of this, not good, in my opinion. And the fact that they decided to show it, I just don't understand. Maybe that's me being nitpicky or biased that they even did third person. But I feel like the game would have been far more immersive if you just could stand first person the whole time, or at least have a choice. I understand that maybe the rope swinging or some of the platforming, you would kind of want to see all around you. It's a big part of why platforming in first person never works. However, this game, it's not super intense in that aspect. If anything, it's the game's own mechanics and, visual choices like this that actually made me fall, rather than the intense jumping or timing-based challenges. In my opinion, I believe there is a way to fix this. Find a way to keep the game entirely in first person that will maximize your immersion. However, I don't really think that going into third person full-time would work either. I would be interested to see that. My one complaint would be that the combat, specifically the melee combat, might not work out as well. But who am I to say? Maybe I could be wrong. But okay, now that we've got that out of the way, that is my major complaint within the game. I do have one other minor complaint though, however, and it's a me problem, but I will say, as a word of warning, it's not that shiny cup over there. No, I'm just kidding. This game is a beast on PC. It runs really well for as good as it looks, I'll give it that. However, if you're planning to play this game at reasonable settings or reasonable resolutions, above 1080p, and with decent texture quality on, you're going to get your shit rocked if you don't have above an 8GB VRAM card. I, for one, have an RTX 3070, and while playing with DLSS, which for some reason every time I turn off the game it turns off, by the way, I had a hard time running this game. I don't know why or what's going on with that, but I had a really hard time running this game without those, necessary benefactors. The DLSS on quality, balance, or even performance mode at times. It was all called for throughout the course of the game, and that's something that you should be aware of. So if you have an AMD card, honestly, quite frankly, AMD isn't as stingy with their VRAM on their cards. A lot of them are, 16 or even 20 gigabytes a lot of times. But if you have an 8GB card, I don't really recommend this game on PC. But if you're able to play it on console or anything like that, you don't even really have to worry about that. But okay, big, huge aspect of the video out of the way. I feel like you should already know by now if you like the game or not. However, granularly speaking, I want to gush about it a little bit more because this game's great. I didn't think so at first. Like I said, I wasn't so sure about a lot of aspects of it. However, it's won me over almost entirely. From a story standpoint, I'll keep it kind of brief. I do think it's very slow in its build-up. I feel like the mystery of the actual what you're searching for isn't there. But one thing that you can always count on with Indy is that he's going to get put up against some Nazis, and he's going to look damn good doing it. Obviously, there's other intrigue within the story. Gina is kind of like your sidekick throughout the story, or if you want to say partner, if that's more appropriate. But she's not into the mission for the same reason that Indy is, but she plays a great juxtaposition of the two lines of thinking, where Indy is in it just as much for the professionalism of it and the adventure, as well, of course, as, keeping it out of Nazi hands. With Gina, there's a lot more personal reasons that I won't even get into for the sake of the video, but a lot of the interactions between her and the main antagonist, Voss, is really interesting as well. Another character I think was really well done was Voss. Mostly because he is super not intimidating. He is not an intimidating character in the traditional sense, but you can tell he's very smart, even if he is undervalued in his profession. Speaking of, it's that cool little rivalry that you can tell that was already there with these characters that's heavily implied, that to me just feels like a nice icing on the cake. Both of these side characters do incredibly well at their jobs within the game. It feels good. There's other characters that I don't really want to get into their nature because of spoilers, but overall I would say the performances of all of these characters, as well as the kind of mission statement for the game, it does its job well enough. The story is satisfying. One thing from a narrative that I did want to point out is that the game takes place between Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first movie, and The Last Crusade, the third but technically second movie, because Temple of Doom is a prequel to Raiders. And with that in mind, knowing that, his whole adventure with Marion and the Ark of the Covenant has already happened, as well as the fact that his next adventure or major adventure will be with his father, who there's some history there with. It's interesting to note how much of the groundwork, I can't say groundwork because it's done after the fact, but how much attention to, Indy's romance with Marion, or at this point, lack thereof, or his need to not be like his father, however, wanting to impress his father, is always at the forefront of Indy. And there's a lot of character work done with that, and it's interesting to see them give character development to a character that we feel is so well established in our hearts already. So overall, outside of a slow opener, I think the game gets pretty good. Now, the only other aspect of the game I really want to talk about is authenticity. It's not a replica, and in that way, much like a lot of the ancient artifacts within these movies, this is not just a replica, but it is authentic. Earlier, I mentioned that this game was like Indiana Jones. It isn't Indiana Jones. And in those comparisons, visually speaking, you're going to feel that. The pacing of the game and the way it's set up, you're going to feel that. It's not as brisk as the movies, even though some of the movies are long too. You're getting a whole story in 2.5 hours. In this, you're going to maybe go through one of the major sections of the game, like the Vatican or Giza, within that same amount of time. Just depending on how fast you're going through the main objectives or the very well written and very, I feel, rewarding side objectives. Now, I won't linger on any of these elements for too long, but there's collection stuff, finding other relics, helping other characters for plot lines to move along, and the best thing I can say about it is satisfying. It rewards your time, but I will say for those who kind of want that traditional experience of Indy, I recommend looking for those side quests that are relevant. There are some that involve characters from the story, but then there are also those that very clearly feel like side objectives. As I said, finding relics, solving different tombs and puzzles that are, secondary. And it's the ability to parse that's going to really increase your enjoyment, or lack thereof, of the pacing. But outside of the structure like that, let's talk about the elephant in the room here. And I'm talking about that tall motherfucker named Troy Baker, alright? Because, I gotta say it, just like Harrison Ford, I think he did a great job. I would say 98.4% of the time, I listen and I hear Indy. Every once in a while I hear a little bit of, not necessarily Joel, but you can tell that is someone else. And in that way, I think that is exceptional. There's a lot of character work done from Troy Baker, and I think this is the fact that he's able to step into someone else's role and do it as well is amazing. I mean, truly, like if you didn't think Troy Baker actually deserved all the work he gets with games, I think this kind of seals the deal in a lot of ways. Because even looking at Indy in cutscenes, one of my favorite things that happens in the movies is replicated so well in the games, both visually in the cutscenes as well as especially as the audio, because sometimes it happens in first person, where Indy is, down in a tomb somewhere. He's in some kind of temple, and, he's reading out of his notebook, or he's looking at these clues on the wall, and he's slowly uncovering, deciphering something. And because, his eyes start to dart back and forth, almost as if he's reading from his memory some text or something, he slowly starts to uncover some great secret. And it always gives off that feeling, that emotion of, he is the first person to have this revelation or have this knowledge in thousands of years. And that is one of the, I talk about whimsical or awe-inspiring moments of Indiana Jones. That is what encompasses Indy to me. And that's here in its fullest, and it's great. Otherwise, I think the game, outside of running a little rough on my computer at times, looks really good. Detailed environments all throughout. There's plenty of stuff to look at, see, and do, and I always found myself getting lost in a good way, just kind of looking around the world. And visually, for me, my favorite flair was the lighting. Something the game leverages a lot is light sources, and it's all done with the goal of that Indy feel. One instance I saw was, when I opened up a temple door, the door rolled open, letting the sun in. It perfectly shows the silhouette of Indy with the very distinct hat and the iconic outfit. And it really it sealed that deal for me. It really just swung for the fences and brought it home to me that, hey, I am Indy. And then, 20 seconds later, I had to swing across this gap, and I was like, oh, hey, there's Indy. Oh, it's not me anymore. I had an out-of-body experience. But the lighting doesn't stop there either. Of course, there's the different times of days for the different locations you're going to, which is always really cool to see. There's a good variety that matches the very different biomes from, mountaintops to deserts to underground temples and tombs to the Vatican itself. But my absolute favorite tiny detail was in a lot of cutscenes, they do this thing that, in movies it makes a little more sense, very Addams Family or of course Indie, where you'll look at the characters and you can notice that the light, even if they're in like a little bit of a shaded or like darker area, the light is perfectly shining on their eyes, even though it makes no sense. And it really gives a lot of room for their expressions and emotions to show, even in a somewhat darker environment. Very Spielberg, I would say. And in that way, you can see a lot of the inspirations from the films with that as well. But okay, we're on to the final section before I get out of your way. This is a little bit of a longer review than I kind of anticipated it being, but hey, I like the game and I want to talk about it. And for better or worse, let's talk about the gameplay itself. I feel like I've covered traversal already enough throughout the video, so we won't linger on that. But there's really two major aspects of the gameplay left that I really wanted to talk about. First up is the puzzles. And, whether it's trying to get a locker opened and you have to read some Nazi note and decipher exactly what the code is, all the way up to the super scripted, sometimes item-based, sometimes logic-based puzzles of these shrines and temples. Either way, I think they're all satisfying in the sense that none of them are too difficult, and you always kind of have the tools at your disposal to figure out what's going on. What I mean by that is every puzzle has a hint system. You take pictures with your camera and you kind of learn more if you want to, but that's entirely opt-in. Now, if there are any pertinent clues within notes or, pictures you've previously taken, they're all going to be properly categorized in the puzzle section of your journal, which is really, really cool. That organization, unfortunately, doesn't work as well on PC. I can see how working with a controller, the UI and the menu would actually flow a lot better. But mouse and keyboard using A and D and Q and E to kind of go through the tabs just really didn't work well for me. I thought it was very annoying. It was tedious and, kind of felt like in Skyrim where people modded in Sky UI, the PC-friendly menus and inventory. I would love to see like a different version of the menu, although I realize that would be inefficient for them to do two different menus. But overall, I think the puzzles are good, and your progression through these different environments and looping back, I won't call it a Metroidvania by any sense, but eventually you'll get a key or an outfit that allows you to sneak past enemies into a new area. And it's always super satisfying to go to a location that you've walked by 30 times and finally be able to access something new. But now finally, let's talk about the combat. So yeah, this game heavily features, honestly, quite frankly, it heavily favors stealth over anything else. And stealth is okay. It's not great. Enemies I think their vision cones and their detectability is good enough. Unfortunately, I think they have the object permanence of like a 2-day-old baby. Like they'll be like looking for you heavily and they'll like they see you. Like they're not in attack mode. They won't forget you that quickly then. But like they very clearly see someone who's sketchy. You walk around the corner, the question mark instantly goes down and they're like, must have been the wind. And in that way, it's a little, annoying to kind of juke the system. It felt like it could have been a lot more aggressive in that sense. Speaking of aggressive, however, while you are sneaking around, you can pick up weapons all around the world, whether it be a shovel, a toilet brush, an actual sledgehammer, or any myriad of different unique items that are cluttered all throughout the world. If you have one of those in your hand, you go up behind someone, you can silently stealth take down a lot of enemies within the game. These are brutal, very well animated, and quite frankly, just awesome. But sometimes you do get your cover blown. You're going to have to fight people, and it's going to just be what it is. The melee combat, those same items you used for stealth takedowns earlier, are no longer single use. A lot of them have charges. You hit someone 3 times, that same sledgehammer is going to break. Something like that. And it all feels pretty well balanced. As long as you're, kind of juggling weapons or the whip, you can always disarm or attack enemies in a pretty aggressive fashion. Though sometimes you're going to have no weapons, you're going to have to go fist to fist with some of these guys. It's then that you're going to hear the whip crack of a nice punch that is so iconic to the movies that it would have felt empty without that in the game, and I'm glad that it's here. Punching enemies sounds like it should be way louder than it actually is within the game, So sometimes you'll be punching a guy and it'll sound super loud. Then the guy around the corner doesn't really hear it like that. But it's just all a part of that fantasy, so I didn't really take too much into that one. As far as my thoughts on the actual melee combat and the brawling elements of the game, I think it's challenging enough. I think the upgrade system that you get throughout the course of the game, which are as you make new discoveries, do side quests, you get what are called adventure points. And throughout the world, one collectible you'll get are these books that you can read, and they'll grant you different skills. A lot of the times it's nothing too crazy, small little perks like a little more health, a little more stamina. There's one where, sometimes if you get knocked out, there's a chance that Indy will be able to grab the fedora off the ground, stand back up, and you get a second wind. There's stuff there that's so cool. However, the ones that benefited me the most were always when it came to brawling, because I did feel that was the element of the game that challenged me the most. Again, not too hard, but when you do have to engage with it on a deeper level, and sometimes you do, it can be a little tough. I will say that the projectile, gun weapons within the game are a little bit of okay. It feels like melee is a lot more effective, both in terms of not detecting all enemies in the area, but it also felt like enemies took a lot of bullets a lot of the time throughout the course of the game. So it just didn't feel very satisfying to use those. But again, a lot of times you're stealthing around, you're not going to engage with that anyway. And with that being said, I think the gameplay to Indiana Jones is good. I don't think it's incredible, but it's good. As you go around a lot of these open environments and some of the more linear ones, there is a fantasy to playing Indiana Jones that I was worried going into this game wouldn't be fulfilled in every aspect. And whether it be the pacing that is a little too long for the stretch of a movie, making this adventure feel huge, or the whiplash of going back between first and third person, there are a few things that do take you out of being indie. But I would say, overall, much like the disguises within the game, a lot of the time the game passes super well for feeling like Indiana Jones. While I don't think this is a perfect game, this is a gem within the Indiana Jones franchise. I would rather just say it is a flawed gem. There are cracks in it that, once you shine a light on it a little further, look a little closer, you will notice them. However, I don't think it's enough to take away from the fact that if you take this and you sell it somewhere, you're going to get a shit ton of money. This game is worth its weight in gold. It's great. I love it. And while I don't necessarily think it's my game of the year, I think it's probably my number 2. It's pretty damn good. Thank you. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video. It's a little longer, so thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing. Consider checking out some of my other longer videos. I've got an hour-long video on Firewatch and a 2-hour video on Alien Isolation. You should also look out for a third long video coming later this year. I'm not going to say what it is, and I'm not going to commit to doing 2 this year, but you should at least look out to one more coming a little later in the year, maybe late summer, early fall. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.